Hi everyone, welcome to the third chapter of A Tale of Two Cities, written by Charles Dickens, and this story is pitched for intermediate and upper intermediate students. This is the third chapter of this story, the series. So if you haven't watched the previous chapters, I recommend you to go back and start the story from the beginning. Now, chapter 3, well, as you know, this story is published by Oxford University, Oxford Bookworm Library, copyrighted by Oxford. In the previous chapter, we met Jarvis Lorry, Dr. Manette, and his daughter Lucie. Lucie and father, they had a father-daughter drama, Lucie and Dr. Manette, and Dr. Manette kept one number, 105 North Tower. Am I right? I don't remember. 105, I think. And there was a mysterious lady in the wine shop. I don't remember her name. Well, it doesn't matter. Now we want to go with this background. We want to read chapter 3. It's 1780 now, and 5 years after chapter 2, because Dr. Manette getting released from prison happened in 1775. Now we want to read about a trial in London, 1780. What is a trial? Do you know the meaning of trial? Trial is an examination done in a court where a judge, use a hammer and call guilty or not guilty. So trial is an examination in which a judge, a jury, they decide whether somebody is guilty or not. And now we want to read about a trial in London. What year? 1780. Let's start. Tellson's Bank, in the city of London, was an old, dark and ugly building. Are we going to have a trial at Tellson's Bank? It smelt of dust. The meaning of dust? Dust is that powder that cover a ground or a surface that you need to clean. It smelt is the past form of smell. It smelt of dust and old papers, and the people who worked there all seemed old and dusty. Dusty means covered with dust. They were all old and dusty too. Outside the building sat Jerry Cruncher, the guy that we met in the first episode, the first chapter, who delivered messages. Do you remember? Who carried messages for people in the bank. In the first chapter, Jerry Cruncher delivered a message to Jarvis Lorry. One morning in March 1780, Jerry had to go to the Old Bailey to collect an important message from Mr. Lorry. Trials at the Old Bailey were usually for very dangerous criminals, so Old Bailey was a city that trials took place there, and trials there were for very dangerous criminals. And the prisoner that morning was a young man of about 25. We have a new character, a criminal that is going to have a trial. What is accused of? Let's see. A 25-year-old man, well-dressed and quite calm. Now Jerry asked, What's he done? What has he done? What's he done? Jerry asked the doorman quietly. So we should read the line quietly. What's he done? Jerry asked the doorman. And who is a doorman? Doorman is anybody at the entrance to a large building. For example, a security guard, a postman, a bellboy, a bouncer, anybody, a janitor, anybody who stands by at the entrance to a large building. A doorman. What's he done? Jerry asked the doorman quietly. He's a spy, a French spy, the doorman told him. He travels from England to France and tells the French king secret information about our English army. Well, this is what a spy does. So they think that 25 years old man is a spy. Jerry, what'll happen? He's guilty. Oh, he'll have to die. No question of that, replied the doorman enthusiastically. Enthusiastic is a person who is very interested in a topic or activity, and enthusiastically means with a great interest. Now, the doorman replied enthusiastically, they'll hang him. He was enthusiastic. He was interested in somebody's being killed. Jerry, what's his name? Our new character, Donay, Charles Donay. Not an English name, is it? Not an English name, is it? Charles Donay. We're going to meet this guy, the 25 years old, well-dressed, calm and quiet man, that they think that he is a spy. While Jerry waited, he looked around at the crowd inside the Old Bailey and noticed a young lady of about 20 years. Lucie? And her father, familiar, Dr. Manette, a gentleman with very white hair. The young lady seemed very sad when she looked at the prisoner. So Lucie knows Charles Donay? And held herself close to her father. Then the trial began, and the first person who spoke against Charles Donay was called John Bassard. Who is John Bassard? Apparently, Charles Donay is a friend to Dr. Manette and Lucie Manette. Now, John Bassard. He was an honest man, he said. I'm proud to be an Englishman. Yes, he was, or had been, a friend of the prisoners. And in the prisoners' pockets, he had seen important plans and lists about the English armies. No, of course, he had not put the lists there himself. And no, he was not a spy himself. He was not someone paid to make traps for innocent people. These lines were told by John Bassard. Innocent means not guilty. Next, the young lady spoke. By young lady, does it mean Lucie? She said that she had met the boat which had carried her and her father from France to England. Yes, now Lucie is talking. He was very good and kind to my father and to me, she said. Who is this Charles Donay? Was he... now I think the judge is asking. Was he traveling alone on the ship? Lucie. No, he was with two French gentlemen. Judge. Now, Miss Manette, did you see him show them anything that looked like a list? No, I didn't see anything like that. Questions. The trial went on. To go on means to continue. And finally, a small red-haired man spoke. He told the judge that he had seen Mr. Donay at a hotel in a town where there were many soldiers and ships. Then one of the lawyers a man called Sidney Cartoon. Oh, too many characters. Now another one. Sidney Cartoon, a lawyer, wrote some words on a piece of paper and gave it to Mr. Stryver. Who is Mr. Stryver? The lawyer who was speaking for Mr. Donnay. So Mr. Stryver is the lawyer that is speaking for Mr. Donnay. It's Mr. Donnay's lawyer. Now, Mr. Stryver is asking, are you quite sure that the prisoner is the man you saw? Mr. Stryver asked the red-haired man. Quite sure, said the man. The red lines belongs to the red-haired man. Now, who is this guy? Have you ever seen anyone like the prisoner? Asked Mr. Stryver. I'd always be able to recognize him. The red-haired man was very confident, sure of himself, certain. When you are confident, you are certain about something. Then I must ask you to look at the gentleman over there, said Mr. Stryver, pointing to Sidney Cartoon, the other lawyer. Mr. Stryver and Mr. Cartoon, both of them were liars. So Mr. Stryver pointed at somebody else, pointed at some of the lawyers, and he asked the red-haired man to look at the other lawyer, Sidney Cartoon. Don't you think that he is very likely the prisoner? Oh, some of the lawyers there is very similar to our criminal Charles Dickens. They're very similar. Everyone in the court could see that Sidney Cartoon and Charles Dickens were indeed very similar. Interesting. Well then, said Mr. Stryver, it is so easy to find a man like the prisoner that we can even find one in this room. Find one person similar to our criminal. So how can you be so sure that it was the prisoner you saw in the hotel? And the red-haired man said not another word. So Mr. Stryver is a very clever lawyer. And now this is a picture of a trial. This man that I'm pointing at might be Mr. Stryver, and maybe this is Sidney Cartoon, which is very similar to Mr. Charles Dickens. So this is Sidney Cartoon, this is Charles Dickens, and this person might be the witness, the red-haired man who said that he met this guy at a hotel, and among the crowd might be Dr. Manette, Lucie, and maybe Jarvis Lowry. I asked you to look at the gentleman over there. The lawyers talked and argued, and when at last the trial came to an end, Jerry Cruncher had fallen asleep. Argue means to quarrel, to agree and disagree, and talking with reason and evidence. But Mr. Lowry woke him up and gave him a piece of paper. Not guilty were the words written on it, and Jerry hurried back to Tellson's Bank with the message. To hurry means to move or act with great haste, to rush. Sidney Cartoon seemed to be a man who did not care about anyone or anything. He was Mr. Stryver's assistant. In fact, He did most of the real work for Mr. Stryver. Stryver was good at speaking. Good at. Pay attention to preposition at. Mr. Stryver was good at speaking at a trial, but he was not good at discovering important facts and details, especially when these details were hidden in a lot of papers. Every night, Cartoon studied the many papers that lawyers have to read, and he wrote down the questions which Stryver should ask at the next day's trial. And every day Stryver asked these questions, and people thought how clever he was. But the questions were actually designed by Sidney Cartoon. Outside the Old Bailey, Mr. Darnay was a free man. Now Darnay is free, just like Dr. Manette. Mr. Darnay, now a free man, met his friends Dr. Manette and his daughter Lucie, Mr. Jarvis Lorry, Mr. Stryver, and Mr. Cartoon. They are all friends together, even the lawyer, Mr. Stryver, and Mr. Cartoon. These are all friends. Dr. Manette no longer looked like the man in the room above Deforge wine shop. Yeah, the woman that I was searching for her name was Deforge 5 years ago. His hair was white, but his eyes were bright, and he stood straight and strong. Sometimes his face became dark and sad when he remembered the years in the Bastille prison. At these times, only his daughter Lucie, whom he loved so much, could help him. As they stood there talking, a strange expression came over Dr. Manette's face. Expression showing how you feel or what you think using words or action. For example, I showed that I'm angry with this expression on my face. I'm showing that I'm happy with this expression on my face. As they stood there talking, a strange expression came over Dr. Manette's face. He was staring at Charles Darnay, but he did not seem to see him. For a few moments, there was dislike, even fear in his eyes. "My father," said Lucie softly, putting her hand on his arm. "Shall we go home now?" The answer, "Yes," he answered slowly. "Yes." "Oh, who is this lady?" Soon they drove off in a coach, and then Mr. Stryver and Mr. Lorry walked away, leaving Mr. Darnay and Mr. Cartoon alone. Now this Mr. Darnay and Mr. Cartoon, they look alike, so they must have a story with this point. Cartoon: "It must be strange for you," said Cartoon, "to be a free man again, and to be standing here, talking to a man who looks just like you. Let us go out and eat together." After they had eaten, Cartoon said softly, "How sad and worried Miss Manette was for you today. She's a very beautiful young woman, don't you think?" Darnay did not reply to what Cartoon had said, but he thanked him for his help at the trial. "I don't want your thanks," replied Cartoon. "I have done nothing, and I don't think I like you." Now, these two are not going to get along with each other very good. This Miss Prose, we are going to meet this girl in next slides. So Miss Prose seemed at first sight a very alarming person. We have the lines about Miss Prose in the coming slides. No, Darnay. Well, you have no reason to like me, but I hope that you will allow me to pay the bill for both of us. Of course. And as you are paying for me, I'll have another bottle of wine. This guy's really rude. After Darnay had left, Cartoon drank some more wine and looked at himself in the mirror. He was very angry because Darnay looked so much like him. He was angry that a criminal looked like him, but was so different. Cartoon knew that he was a very clever lawyer and that he was a good and honest man. But he had never been successful for himself. He drank too much, and his life was unhappy and friendless. His cleverness and his hard work in the law only made others, like Mr. Stryver, successful and rich. So Cartoon was in the shadow. Nobody paid attention to him. Nobody maybe thanked him, and he didn't have friends. He remembered Lucie Manette's worried face when she watched Darnay in court. Now these are cartoon lines. They should be in purple. If I changed places with Darnay, he whispered to himself. Whisper. Would those blue eyes of Miss Manette look at me in the same way? No, it's too late now. Does he really want to do this? Change his place with Darnay? He drank another bottle of wine and fell asleep. In a quiet street not far away was the house where Dr. Manette and Lucie lived. Miss Prose had red hair and a quick, sharp voice, and seemed at first sight a very alarming person. But everybody knew that she was in fact a warm-hearted, kind, and unselfish, not selfish friend. Unselfish, willing to put your needs or wishes before others. He would do anything to guard her darling Lucie from trouble or danger. I think it might be the last slide. Dr. Manette was now well enough, means healthy, to work as a doctor. And he, Lucie, and Miss Prose led a quiet, comfortable life. Jarvis Lorry, who had become a close family friend, came regularly to the house. And in the month after the trial, Mr. Darnay and Mr. Cartoon were also frequent visitors. Good friends, good gathering. I envy you. This did not please Miss Prose at all. Why? They're friends. What's wrong? Who always looked very cross and angry when they came. Why? Nobody is good enough for my darling Lucie. Yeah, that's what she thinks. She told Mr. Lorry one day. And I don't like all these hundreds of visitors. Because she needs to cook and clean? Oh, Mr. Lorry had a very high opinion of Miss Prose, did he? But he wasn't brave enough to argue that 2 visitors were not hundreds. Nobody argued with Miss Prose if they could avoid it. This is the end of chapter 3. I know that this story is about the French Revolution, but I don't know how these characters are going to relate to French Revolution, how are gonna play their roles. We have to go on reading, continue reading to find out about that, and let's see how many words we have learned so far in chapter 3. Of course, it is done. Chapter 3 is done. Dust. Do you know the meaning of that? Dusty. Trial. Doorman. Enthusiastically. Confident. Argue. Hairy. Expression. Unselfish. Warm-hearted. So many new words. Very good. Thank you for watching. This story continues, and we are going to meet you again in the next video, chapter 4. So long.